Gonna do that. And before I get too far into this, I need to make sure you have the proper tools here. So for today, really, you're only gonna be using your hands, the clay, a bucket of water, and a sponge as your main tools. As we go forward, you are gonna wanna have a needle tool, a wooden tool, and a rib tool. The reason why I say you're not going to be using these tools so much today is because you're really going to be focusing on centering your clay and getting the clay centered. So that's the very first step here. So once you have thrown that down, another thing to note is some of you may sit down to kick wheels like I am here, and you're going to be kicking forward with your dominant foot. So if you're a righty, you're going to kick forward with your right foot. Lefties, you're going to kick forward with your left. You always want to kick with your hands up. You don't ever want to be touching the clay and having your hands on the wheel. So once we have our suction, you're going to seal it with your fingertip. Just wet your hand down in the water and get that sealed. And then what you're going to do is you are going to do something called coning. So we want to start getting this process of compressing the clay and getting it into a cone, and it helps us get it centered. What you're gonna do is you're gonna offset your hand so that the palm of one hand is right in the middle of your other hand. So I'm gonna set my hands down here. One hand is gonna cup on that side. My other hand is gonna put pressure on. You can see my forearms are braced on the tray, and I let the clay slide under my hands. Now your hands are gonna dry out. So you always want to be going back and just make sure your hands are nice and wet so that your hands can still slide up the clay into a cone. It doesn't have to be too skinny of a cone. And then we're going to push it down. Now watch my arm position. My elbow is right behind my palm, and this arm is braced, and that allows me to use the pressure behind my hand to push it down nice and quickly. And you want it to be about 3 inches or so tall. Don't have it be too tall. And after we've coned, we've pressed it down, now it's the time to get it centered. When you start centering your clay, you want to be thinking about this as a clock. So you are going to be pushing in at 8 o'clock and 5 o'clock. So this hand is going to push in. And I would recommend doing one hand at a time. So try your left hand first, those of you that are righties. I want you to try your left hand first, and you're just pushing in right here. And then you can bring in your other hand, kind of at a 45-degree angle, right over the middle. And you're gonna push down and in with equal pressure. And then you take your hands off once you don't feel the clay moving anymore. Now this is the hardest step, but it's the most important step. And I'm gonna show that one more time. So right now you can tell the clay is not centered anymore. I'm gonna push in with my left and then get my right in here. Pressing down, you can see I kind of lock my hands together to stay steady. My forearms are braced. And then I gently take my hands off. Now, one thing that I see beginners do is that you make way too quick of movements. And so sometimes students will be like, oh, it's centered, yay! And then you can see what happens, it gets off-centered again. So always slow, steady movements are always the best. So in with the left, get your right hand coming over and down. And it's almost like I'm karate chopping. Don't karate chop just right on the top. You want to come in at a 45-degree angle to keep that clay down. You're kind of pressing together. All right, now I want you to get 3 pieces of clay centered, yes. So after you get this piece of clay centered, you're gonna hit it off center, just like I was just doing, and you're gonna cone it up, push it down, and do those steps again. I'm gonna show you that one more time. So I'm coning it up from the sides. My hands are offset, getting it into that cone. I'm gonna push it down. So you need to do this 3 times. Now, one way that you can tell if your pot is centered or not, maybe you think this is centered, and you can brace your forearms on the tray and put your fingertip near the pot, and you can see that it goes and comes and goes and comes. That is obviously not centered. So now comes the centering. So my left hand comes in at 8 o'clock, my right hand at 5. I get nice even pressure. and then I gently come off my clay. Do that 3 times, and then you can start this next step. This next step starts to open it up and create a cylinder. Some of you will get to this today. Some of you will just be working on your centering. So the very first step I call the belly button step. It's just your hands are on the outside of the piece of clay, and you're just gonna go down with your thumbs about 1 inch, nice and gradually, and then just gently raise your thumbs back out. This next step I call the I love you step. You literally make an I love you. You're gonna hook your thumb on your braced arm, and you get your wrist up. And because my thumb is on my braced hand, I'm gonna go straight down. And I go down until I'm 1/4 of an inch from the bat or the wheel head, whatever you have. Here's where your first tool comes into play, your needle tool. You wanna be able to check the thickness of your clay. And you are hoping to have your clay be about 1/4 of an inch thick. So yes, I pressed all the way to my bat. I'm gonna shimmy my hand down the needle tool, grabbing onto it to see how thick that is. So that is a pretty good thickness. That's about 1/4 of an inch. I'm good to go with that. If it were about like this, about 1/2 an inch, I would know that I'd need to go down a little bit further. This is looking good. Okay, so now that we have our depth, now we wanna get our width. So my hand is going back to where I was with that I love you kind of bracing. If it feels better to go down with your first 2 fingers, that is fine. This just feels better to me, so you guys try what feels best, okay? All right, now we want to get a flat U shape on the bottom, okay? So we want our base to be really flat and our walls to be really straight up and down. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be pushing the clay over to my palm with the tips of my fingers. And one thing that might happen, oh, it's doing okay. Sometimes what happens is this rim starts to crack. My rim is kind of cracking there. What you can do is you can compress that down. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna quack like a duck, grab the wall, and gently press down with this finger. So it should look like a little bridge that you're making. You support the wall and press down gently. Then, now that I've pressed my clay over, I've gotten my width. My base is relatively flat. I'm gonna need to do a pull to get the height, because what you're shooting for is about a 4-inch tall mug, or the cylinder for our mug. And we want our walls nice and straight up and down before we do any shaping for that mug. So I'm gonna have fingertips on the outside, fingertips right on the inside. Again, when we think of a clock, you should be right at 3 o'clock. And what my fingertips on the outside are doing, they're just pressing and moving up the wall of the clay. These inside fingers are just there for moral support. They are not pushing, they're really not doing anything other than just helping guide. And then once I get to the top, I am going to compress that rim together again, and I'll continue to do my pulls. If you notice, the base of my pot is a little wider than the top because my outside hand was doing the pull, the pressure for the pull. And you want to continue that. What I will do also, so I know how much clay I'm going to be bringing up, sometimes I make a little indentation here so I know what my fingers need to bring up. You can see my wrist is braced on the tray. It acts as kind of like a pivot point going up the clay. And I can tell a lot from your lines on your pot. Those are called throwing rings. If your lines on the pot are nice and even, that means you had a really steady pull. If they are really thick, that means you moved your hands too fast. If they're really thin, that means you were going really slow and steady. So I'm gonna do another one. And sometimes when we're doing these pulls, the rim kind of gets closed off, so just kind of put a little pressure on that rim and you can open it up. Okay, do another pull here. I still have a little bit more height to get out of this. You can see that piece of clay came off in my fingertips. I'm just gonna take that and put it in my bucket. And if your clay feels like it's getting dry, you can take your wet sponge and just wring it over the top of your rim, and that wets down the walls again. If you want to get out a ruler so you know how tall your cylinder is getting. There's rulers on the tool table behind the teacher computer. Now, my cylinder is looking nice and even. My walls are nice and straight. I have my 4-inch tall pot. Now is the time where I would think about how I want to shape this. You can definitely leave this nice and straight up and down. You can even make it more straight by grabbing your rib tool and pressing on the outside, cleaning that up. You can kind of press with the inside of your hand to get a really nice straight pot that shaves off some of that clay. If you don't want it nice and straight and up and down, you can do some fun movements to your pot. So one thing you can do is you can put your fingertips on the inside, your hand on the outside. I need to wet down my wall again. And you can push out from the inside. Now what I'm doing is my fingertips are below, on the inside, are below my outside hand. And I can push out. And what that does is it creates a little belly on the pot. Now it's wider down here and a little bit narrower here. And you can see my rim was starting to wobble. All I had to do was just kind of compress that rim to steady it. If I wanted the top of my pot to get a little bit more narrow, you can do something called collaring in, and it's kind of like choking the clay, and you slowly move up the wall. Now the rib tool can be really fun in making nice angular movements. So what you can do is you can take the hard edge of your pot, and I could really push against it and get a really nice crisp edge down there. You probably can't see it real well. I'll try to do one from this angle so you can kind of see. So if I were to push on that, kind of see a crisper edge. Now I've got a weird thing here. So anyways, think about how you want your pot shaped. You don't have to leave it straight up and down. You can kind of give it a little bit more character. You should have been doing the inspiration assignment where you find images. If you haven't done that already, you'll be looking for images. Now, what I did just there is I took my sponge, so pretend I had my water in there. The very last thing you're gonna do is you're gonna grab your sponge, make sure it's nice and dry, and you're going to put it in your pot while it's spinning. You're gonna get all that water out. You're going to compress your rim, make sure your rim isn't too thin. Then you'll take your wire cutter, wrap it around your hands nice and tight. Put it behind your pot. Press down while you're pulling towards yourself so it doesn't get too thin. If you are throwing on a bat, all you have to do is take this and you're gonna bag it. If you are throwing on the wheel head, what you will do, you need to get it off the wheel and onto a bat. What you would do is you would take your wet sponge, put a puddle of water around your pot, wire cut that. That pulls the water through and you can see it slide. And then what you would do, now normally I pull it to the other side, but since my camera's there, I can't do that. But what you would do is you just put a little pressure on the bottom of the pot until it kind of starts to move. Sometimes you have to do that a couple times. You're gonna put it all the way onto your hand and then you'd have a bat nearby. I'm gonna just put it back down on my bat because I have one here. And then you put it down. And now the very last step is cleaning your wheel. Now this is just as important as sitting down. We need to make sure that the wheel that we, that over there, we need to make sure that all of this stuff is cleaned up. Now you can do this all right at your wheel, which is really nice. And you are going to take all of that gunk and clay, put that into your bucket. Make sure you do a really good job. Also, here's another thing. If you sat down at your wheel and your tray is not steady, it means it's not in the little grooves correctly. So make sure it's in those grooves for the next person. And you're gonna do a really good job cleaning that off.